The Board of Finance will receive the Board of Selectmen budget tonight. And I know this is not on the agenda, but I still like it's going to stay for public review. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Take a minute.
Way too many Johns here.
Way too many. So I'm John Picard. To my right is Matt Gordon, Vice Chair. Robert Donahue and John Rasmus, I believe, are on the phone. I know we have a bad echo there. John Muller, Katie Stein, Jude Hessian. Well, we all work very hard, work very well together. The budget process, which begins in September with the town and the education staff, but also the Board of Finance. It was September/October where we discussed, where we are. And I know last year there was some give and take about the Board of Selectmen recommended a mill rate. That is fine. Just like we recommended, you try to keep the expenses around 3% and try to keep the mill rate at or under 2%. So it really starts with all of us working together. The budgets are built throughout the fall. And then in January, the combined Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance meeting for town and staff, and then you have the BOS, the BOF, and BOE meeting with the educational budget. So the process up until now, the education budget has been approved by the Board of Education and recommended by the Board of Selectmen. The town budget has been approved by the Board of Selectmen. And tonight, as I said earlier, the Board of Finance receives both recommended budgets from the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education. And it's also important to know that we always say tonight we want to hear from you, but it's throughout the whole process. So the Board of Finance will begin their budget review. Public input is incredibly important, whether it's showing up in person, phone calls, emails. We really do want to hear what you have to say. And we have meetings and workshops that we will have throughout the coming months. So what happens next? After we receive the budgets tonight, we will have our own Board of Finance budget workshops, and I've said this to the Board of Finance members, if they want anybody, department head, Board of Education, whomever, to come before us to explain the budget or something, to have some questions. I'm sure they'd all happy to be there. We have a second public hearing April 8th, obviously 2025, and then the Board of Finance recommends the fiscal 26 budget. The referendum date is May 6th, 2025, and then the Board of Finance will set the mill rate on May 7th, 2025. So now I'd like to hear from our first selectman, if she'd like to introduce her Board of Selectmen and present the budget to us. Peggy?
Yeah, it's sharing, because that wasn't on the screen, the presentation, so I think she needs to do the share. There's just a couple slides. And then, I don't know, are we having board members present just to be here?
John is not accepting my promotion.
Scott's accused. Well, anyways, we'll proceed with the, sorry about that. We'll have a little technical stuff as usual. So I'm first then, I guess, huh? I thought I was second.
I have you first. I have you first. You're selected, so if you want, I'll bump you.
It's okay.
Nice and simple for you.
No, well, first of all, I want to thank you and welcome everybody tonight. This was a culmination of work done by the Board of Selectmen. I know Jen Gordon is here, Bruce Wilson is here. I think I heard Al's voice. Al's over here, Bruce, yes. And Scott Murphy's online. And this is a process that the town starts really in November. And I send out kind of a budget guidance letter to the town departments. They submit kind of requests. I work through them. And this year I presented a kind of first selectman's recommended budget to my board in January. And then we had a workshop and made some amendments to that and finalized the budget that you see presented. I just want to thank the staff for all their hard work. And part of that recommendation to the staff was that I really wanted this to be a status quo year. Over the last couple of years, we've done a number of reorganizations, consolidation of departments, kind of staffing changes, and this year was not meant, we're just kind of status quo. We also had taken some reductions last year. I had asked all departments to reduce their budgets by 1%, and they found savings, and those are still embedded in this. I didn't ask for more savings, but they also were able to add those things back. So most of what the staff requested was just maintenance agreements and things like that. But there's a few other small items in there that is in this budget. So if we proceed on to page 3, which is just the goals of this year. Similar to in the past, we're trying to align what we do in our budgeting with our town strategic plan. And one of the big issues that we're facing because of the referendums that were approved in 2022 is an increase in our bonding, which means more debt is going into the budget every year. So we've had this long-term plan. We talk a lot about the Madison investment plan, what the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen have been adopting basically as an approach to our capital spending, but also to mitigate the increase in debt service so it doesn't impact the taxpayer so much. And so we've been targeting trying to keep that mill rate at growing at as low a level as possible. And so we talk about, we still want to keep with that goal. We try to keep it 2% or below. The last couple of years, the boards have kind of worked towards that. The Board of Finance is the ultimate authority in terms of setting the mill rate. The Board of Selectmen tries to do what it can with different tools it has to make sure that we can meet those objectives. And really what we're trying to do is, maintain services and provide things to the community they've asked for, and keep projects moving through the system so that we're not, the quintessential kicking the can down the road, I know is used a lot, but it's really putting off things that we really should be investing in today or maintaining today so we don't have large capital expenditures in the future. So moving on to the next page is just summarizes where that budget is at. And the operational budget, which is really the day-to-day operations of the town, it's not the capital budget of the projects. We're recommending a operational budget of $27.2 million. This represents a $700,000 increase or 2.6%. I think this is a very reasonable request. It's actually below where the inflation rate is today. We have a number of contracts in here that have locked in things. We have collective bargaining agreements, some of which are more than 2.6%. So there are factors that are higher, and then there are other things that are offset and lower. And we've really made an attempt to try to keep those recurring costs down and manageable as much as possible. But the town budget overall includes the capital spending, and the capital spending is funded by two things. One is our CIP program, which is kind of a cash pay system where we save up in savings accounts every year to pay for our projects, and then we issue debt for larger projects. So as you can see, the capital account is slightly declining what we're putting into our capital program. Well, because the debt service is increasing substantially. We did a big bond increase, and I'll talk about that later. As the new school rolls on, which is the largest bonded project we have, that is resulting in, we're starting to see the debt service. But as I'll show later, the whole balance of capital and debt services to kind of keep this stream. So as we ramped up capital early into our CIP program, we're now ramping it down slightly so that we can absorb the increase in the interest expense. And then obviously the education budget, which will be presented later, was recommended by, this represents what the Board of Ed is recommending, leading to a grand total of $100.5 million, a $2.9 million change, and a 3% year-over-year change for the total town budget. The next slide kind of puts that in context so we can look back and say, well, how does this compare to previous years? And I think one of the things I've done since I've really come into office, this is now my 6th budget, is try to keep that recurring operational budget growing at a slower rate. And I think we've really achieved that. If you look at the trends, I came in, the last budget grew at 7%, the operational budget, and it's been a trend downward with a few blips here and there because of different expenses. And this year we're seeing a 2.6%, which is the lowest growth of the town operating budget in 7 years. If you look at the town budget, same trend line, growing at 4%, despite the fact that we've actually seen an increase in debt. So at a much lower rate than what we saw back in 2020. Seeing an overall growth because of what we know is approved by the taxpayers, the bonding projects are driving that 4% increase. And then if you combine everything, you look at overall, the education budget with the combined, with the town budget, you're looking at a 3%, which is the lowest in the last 4 years that the budget is projected to be growing. So, and then I just put the mill rate in context here. We're continuing to focus on trying to keep that growth of the mill rate down at a more manageable level, below 2%. There's different tools that can be used. The Board of Finance will talk about that. Some of this would be using the undesignated fund balance. Some of this would be looking at the revenue. Grand list growth has been not as strong this year because obviously we went through a revaluation last year, so we saw big growth in our grand list. So those are all things the Board of Finance will talk about, but if you can see the trend, we've really been able to keep to that, keeping it below 2%, if you look back historically at the mill rate growth. The next slide just really walks through, at a high level, just shows you what's comprising that $1.4 million increase. Pretty much half of that is due to the capital, and when I say capital, it's really debt service, because as you saw on the earlier slide, what we're putting into capital this year is slightly lower than it was. So this is just the debt service rolling on. And then the other thing, which we see every year, is personnel costs, salaries. And the reason it says excluding health is that the health insurance actually is flat this year. And whereas last year, I don't know if you recall, health insurance drove 25% of the growth of the operating budget last year. So we've seen a big benefit to that. We're self-funded. And so it's based on experience rates. And I know the Board of Ed is at a similar experience. We're all one pool. So the good thing is we didn't, last year it was like $300,000. I think that we saw the budget take on because of health insurance. This year, it's pretty much flat. And so other personnel costs involve our collective bargaining agreements and just, staff in general to run the town. The next slide just gives a little bit more detail to the kind of call the walkthrough, where we started at the beginning of the year with last year's budget, showing what's driving wages and salaries make up a large chunk of that increase on the operating side. And then there's we also, pay for a substantial part of a number of outside agencies, their budget. So the library, the ambulance, the 2 volunteer fire departments, they each receive funding from the town. And they come in and they meet with myself and our finance director. And then they also went through the budget workshop process with the Board of Finance. So nominal increases, I think everybody's been very conscious of knowing that we, number one, have more interest expense going on, but also that costs have really risen a lot. So people are really trying to manage down their asks. And I appreciate all the work that the outside agencies also have done to that. So if you go to the next slide, staffing. Usually this is a more complicated chart because I've always taken, if we're going to add a position, we like to offset it with something or reduce hours somewhere or whatever, so that the overall head count kind of is generally the same. And we actually did an analysis last year that head count has stayed relatively flat. So there's no new staffing requests from the town except the police department. Last year, if you recall, they came in and requested, I think 3 officers that they requested to be added to the budget. It was 2 officers, right? Yeah, 2 officers. Yeah. And 2 officers, and we agreed to add 1 to the department, knowing that we had a lot of vacancies and it's really hard to recruit police officers. But we committed that we would be willing to add another 1 into the next year's budget. I know the Board of Selectmen felt that was important. We want to continue to make sure that we're properly staffing our police department. And this year they came back asking for an additional officer again. And I think in looking at the vacancy profile of the department, we just didn't think they could fill it by July 1. We already have an existing vacancy, and we also have 2 other officers that might have given notice that they're going to be leaving the department. So we're going to have a number of vacancies. So we decided to put this in as a quarter, towards the last end of the quarter, the last end of the year, as so we can fill the current vacancies and then start looking to fill that new position. So next year, this will be a full 1 position add to the budget. The next slide just kind of highlights, the strategic plan and different areas where we're investing and how it aligns with the strategic plan. We've been really trying to, do I have a different order here? Sorry.
Yeah, go back a slide.
Yeah, G and back. Yeah, you gotta go back. There we go. So we go. Anyway, so we're trying to, back.
1 more.
You were there.
To the strategic plan 1. There we
There you
go.
go.
I'm not touching.
I'm not touching it either. John, what are you doing?
No one, we don't have to talk about the strategic plan. We'll just move on. Anyway, we do try to look at what we're spending and then it lines up obviously with the strategic plan. It's going nuts on you?
It's going
I
nuts.
think Gene's just telling you to move it along.
This is a gremlin.
Heard this one.
So, and this is just lining up some of the things in the budget relative to our key goals in the strategic plan. The next page is really just the refresher of the Madison investment plan. Talk about it all the time. I won't go through this again. Obviously, the Board of Finance is familiar. I just remind people because this is kind of what we wrap our arms around to try to make sure that we're planning for the future. And this was also talked about at the town meeting. So we'll skip past that. But I think the next two slides are helpful just to put things into context. One is capital spending I talked about. We pay for our capital projects through debt and through cash pay, which is our CIP program. And this kind of illustrates, if you look at starting in this current budget year, going out 5 years, the red bar, it indicates how much more is being spent through debt service on our capital projects. And the blue bar represents what we're putting into CIP. So we're trying to balance it out, but we're growing the overall sum of the two at a slow rate so that we don't blow the budget. Because I know there's been a lot of concern about all this interest is going to come on and it's just going to blow the budget. The mill rate's going to go through the roof. The whole point of this plan is that that doesn't happen. And we've tried to front load a lot of the CIP by doing special appropriations into the CIP, using grants to pay for things versus cash pay through CIP. So all of that has helped us get ahead of this a little bit so we can reduce what we're putting into the capital plan over the next couple of years as debt rises. The other thing I just wanted to point out that the CIP plan, which is the cash pay plan, is really shifting for town projects. So if you look at this over the next 5 years, education comprises 28% of that. And the rest is all town related. So I know there's always a conversation about, all of CIP goes to Board of Ed. Well, most of the bonding does, about 60% of the bonding is related to Board of Ed related projects, but we are planning for our town projects as well. And CIP, a lot of that is being funded through CIP. And so the next page talks about the bonding, and it just shows that you've got of where we are now, and this was based on our last issuance was done in December, that our current expected debt outstanding, roughly, 70% of this or 60% of this is related to the Madison School Renewal Plan, but we also still have existing debt for the Ambulance Senior Center, for the library project, and then we had, as part of this last bond issuance, $6.7 million for the Academy project. So our debt includes some itemized for Academy. And then the chart to the right just explains of the debt service, which in the front showed a $900,000 increase in debt service. Where is this kind of coming from, and what's in the budget right now? And so a lot of that is going to the Madison School Renewal Plan. And then the next highest amount is for the Ambulance Senior Center project. That was, what year are we in on that actually? Does anybody remember when we did that?
2011.
2011, yeah. So we're getting kind of towards it's 20-year 20-year bonds, but and then the library, which was more recent, and then Academy. So that just highlights what's built into the budget in terms of our estimated debt service. And then this next page, just to talk about the mill rate briefly. I just wanted to put a little in context again, the mill rate. And I think it's really interesting because last year it was hard to talk about it because we were going through the reval. So the mill rate was going to be coming down because the grand list grew substantially because of the revaluation. So we saw a reduction in about 26%, I think, in our mill rate as a result of the revaluation. But if you look at the trends and you look at where we are today, we're even below the 25-year average for that mill rate. Now I know our taxes are higher because your property values are higher. So we've, a lot of value has been created in Madison over the last 25 years, but the actual tax rate is below what the average has been. And then if you look at that tax rate, that 22 mills, this is the one as of June when the bills went out across the state to different towns. This is where we fall in terms of, and I just took neighboring kind of this area. You look at this and how well we fare compared to our peers and our neighbors in terms of our mill rate. We're in line or much lower than a lot of these communities. So I think it says that we get great value for our money because look at what we have. We have top schools. I mean, blue ribbon high schools and top schools. We have one of the most beautiful public beaches in town. And we have all these incredible amenities. And you're getting that at a mill rate that, in my view, is a bargain compared to some other communities. So need to just put the little context around that when we look at the mill rate. But knowing that, we're trying to plan to keep it that way. We want to be on the value side of the equation, right? And that's what all this is doing when we look at planning, and we try to use all the tools in our toolbox to try to make sure that that mill rate stays reasonable and that people are getting good value for their dollar. So the last slide just highlights where we are, what the town budget is, and what that would look like on a combined basis. And like I said, the mill rate will be something the Board of Finance will be talking extensively about. But if we were to apply a 2%, that would roughly mean a 22.44 mill rate. And then how you get to that will be in your hands. So with that, I will turn it back over to
Thank you,
Dr.
First
Carter.
Selectwoman Peggy Lyons. Thank you very much for the presentation. Before we call Dr. Cook, just a couple of things. And I feel the Madison investment plan, which Stacy Novitz is here, and her team, and Kristen. I want to thank that finance office and Stacy and Kristen. That started several years back, putting that together as the first selectman said, to start to build up the CIP. So when the debt came on, it would be a drastic change. It was thank you. So I just wanted to say that, and I know you're hiding behind the podium there. So I want to say thanks. So now we're going to hear from our superintendent, Dr. Cook, and then at the end, if there's anybody who would like to make a comment, thank you, Dr. Cook.
Thank you. It's great to be here with the Board of Finance tonight. Thanks for the opportunity. With me tonight is Chairman Klaskin from the Board of Ed. I think we probably have some board members online as well, and my staff are here when we get to questions. I'd also like to thank the Finance Department. We always start off sharing where we start and when we start this process. It really does start over the summer, but when we come back to the school year, it starts at the building level, but also the central office levels. The Finance Department level is working on this really from July 1 on. So it's a lot of work to get here tonight, and we're appreciative to be here to be able to present. In terms of where we're at, I always like to start off as Ms. Lyons said, we've just had some really great achievements recently. I think that we've always been a top district in the state in terms of academic achievement, athletic achievement, in terms of what our students go on to do. But it's been great to really receive that recognition in the last year and be able to share that, up front with the community. And I think it's sparking a lot of interest in the town. I know we get contacted all the time if I move into town by this date, can I start the school year? Those types of things, working on finding a house. We receive more of those calls than you could believe, really. So it's exciting to have those conversations. As mentioned, Daniel Hand was a 2024 Blue Ribbon recipient. We've had state championships just recently. Again, our gymnastics team, I think it's been 5 or 6 years in a row, kind of under the radar, but every winter they're winning the state championship in gymnastics, and just had great achievement on the athletic field for our students. We're consistently ranked when Niche does their rankings, the top in New Haven County, one of the tops in the state. And then the School of Distinction for all of our schools a year ago. So that's really, really exciting. And talk about facilities. It was just a recent athletic survey around the state. What was the best football stadium in the state? And we were #1. So, we were really pleased to see that. There's certainly subjection to that, but I would agree with that ranking. I think all of us would. So it's just a great place to be. In terms of facilities achievements, I know you've all driven by Neck River recently, I'm sure, and seen the progress there. We are on pace, so we're very excited about that. A lot of work has gone into that, and we have worked through staffing and programming. So there's we're just pleased to be able to have so much lead time and be in such a great position. And now that you get over there and you see paint on the wall and molding in and sinks in and things like that, it's really starting to come to life. And it's just going to be a phenomenal facility for our students as well as Brown Elementary School. And so we've been giving a lot of tours of Brown Elementary School. A lot of work has happened there. We will fully utilize the site. So for a long time, the 300 wing that was in the back was very lightly used. And so that facility as well as Neck River will be very well utilized next year as we kick off the school year. In terms of our budget, the real reason we're here tonight to talk numbers, and I'll show a slide later on, really where we compare, and we're excited. Again, I will say we have several drivers that are huge increases in our neighboring communities across the state, across the nation, where we have really good news to share. I can't guarantee that will always be the case, but I think that we're in a good position. Today we do a lot of work, but as First Select Woman Lyons mentioned, last year when we were having this conversation, we had a $700,000 increase in health insurance. We're at $120,000 today. So we're really appreciative of that. Some of that is related to collective bargaining. Some of that is related to reduced headcount over the years. And most of that is related to just good experience. So we're very pleased with that, as well as our planning with the town and being self-insured and really continuing always to fund that at the recommended rate of our consultants. So that's great news. As mentioned, some debt service. This is the last year you'll see this from us. So hand is paid off in June, which is, I think, a huge accomplishment. At a time when we're bringing on other debt, admittedly, for a new school building. But also, as we open next school year, we'll be going from 6 sites to 4. And so I think that's a responsible use of our footprint, responsible use of school facilities. And I also want to point out too, the board made probably one of the biggest investments in our teachers since probably the late 80s, when they had the Educational Enhancement Act and salaries were going up a lot. But in terms of where we are today with inflation and a teacher shortage, and a need to make some changes, especially in the salary schedule in certain areas, the board made a huge investment in the teachers, and I think that is going to pay off with better retention and continued great recruitment. We continue to get for most positions a good candidate pool, a strong candidate pool, but this was needed, and I think we're seeing that across the state. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, several of the drivers, there's some good news in here. Overall, the contractual increases because of some retirements, because of some decreases in positions, 2.13% is below all of our contracts that we settled. So that reflects that there have been some work to keep that number down. We do our own substitute teacher coverage, so that is reflecting additional hourly rate, a daily rate for substitute teachers to keep up with the inflation. We have reduced positions as we had to add some. So as we went into this reorganization, we did not expect to have a decrease in workforce, but we do have a shift in workforce. So we decreased some positions and added some others. And then we had decreased positions at Daniel Hand coming into this school year. So when we receive a resignation or retirement in the summer, we ask the questions, do we need to fill this right now? Can we hold off on that? Can we do this a different way? And sometimes we're able to do that. Slide is health insurance. As I covered this before, many of my colleagues are talking 10 to 15% increases in school districts across the state. This is a huge benefit for us. We'd be looking at another percent added onto our budget request if we were just a typical increase here in health insurance. In terms of special education, another great news piece for you here. This public and private placements, if you are following the news cycles in Connecticut, there is rising rates, and this is where they're talking about students that are outplaced. So we've been very successful in having students stay in Madison anytime we're able to do that. We've worked with other districts to combine on transportation. We've worked with other districts to have students tuitioned into programs. We have programming here as much as possible where we try to keep our students, and we have several students aging out. So when they turn 22, they are no longer part of our programming. So they've been planning for that for several years, but those are pieces too. So again, that's very rare to have a negative in that account. Transportation, for our transportation and special ed, this is our students that are transported out, and that's a contractual increase. Again, that's a hidden good news story. Most transportation contracts are seeing 3.5% to 4%. So that was we're in year 4 of a transportation contract. So we will see that go up in a year or so. Next slide is just some operating pieces. So this is our facilities, very complicated year in this area. We started budgeting for this about a year ago. So we have utilities at Neck River. This comes from CLNP, Eversource, and that's the number that they're predicting based on our square feet and what's in the building. We have an 18% across the board for utilities. Again, that's what everyone is seeing, and whether it's business or homes, you're seeing that. We do have a pretty significant reduction of utilities at TCLC, Ryerson, and Jeffrey because we're closing those facilities, and a reduction in maintenance. We will transfer those facilities as of January 1 to the town. So we've had those discussions. So that's a half a year of basically a mothball facility where we'll be in and out. And I know well into the school year next year, retrieving furniture, making changes, things like that, and we'll take care of those buildings. And Peter Anderson will control those still going forward, so he doesn't lose that those pieces. But we'll on the school side, we'll transfer that to the town. In terms of some other pieces, we are continuing to enhance our reading program. We have a major purchase there that teachers have piloted this year. We do not have accreditation next year. Another good news, I know I shared this last time, we are fully accredited by NEASC, our accreditation board. And then we had some reductions related to the reconfiguration. We have dues and contractual increases, technology increases based on their contracts. They go up. Next slide. This is, as I shared, debt service, so Daniel Hand has paid off. Again, great news for that after 20 years that is paid off. So I think that puts us in a great position going forward. The next slide is showing basically our district reference group. So these are the, based on the state determination, these are the school districts that they compare us to. We also look at our neighboring areas because that's more oftentimes in the employment area. But again, we would compare the same whether we're comparing New Haven County, Shoreline, or our DIRG. And so we are one of the lowest in the state as we look at our budget increase requests for next year. We've kept this up to date, so you might have noticed some numbers changing since last time, but we keep that up to date as we go forward. And then the last slide I have is a comparison of the last 6 years, and you'll see we've been under 2% on a 6-year average. Again, pretty incredible that we've been able to do that. A lot of hard work goes into that. And I will point out too, declining enrollment is a function of that. And we looked at our numbers of students going down at the high school and middle school. We've been able to make some decisions not to fill positions or decrease positions. We are starting to hit the bottom of that. We are at the bottom of that, I believe, and we'll start to see that increase. We've seen that happen at the elementary level, and as I said, we have lots of interest in the town and our schools, and we expect that will continue to rebound. So that concludes my presentation.
Nicely done. Thank you, Dr. Cook. I'm just going to repeat what's coming next and then see if anybody has any comments. So right after this, the Board of Finance will receive the budget. So we'll do our workshops. We'll have a second public hearing on April 8th. Board of Finance will recommend the fiscal 26 budget. The referendum will be May 6th, and the Board of Finance will set the voting the next day on May 7th. Well, I'd like to thank our first selectwoman and our superintendent for nice presentations and everyone be here. Does anybody have a comment they'd like to say? I don't know who's virtual. Gee, would anybody like to make a comment? Now's the time. Thanks, Kate.
Sorry.
Come on, kids.
I got nothing for you, John. Nothing.
Thanks, Scott.
That's shocking.
My glasses on. Any other hands raised?
There are 2 hands raised. Michael Nicolini.
Michael?
It's actually Janet, sorry. I'm on his Zoom. Hi, so Janet Nicolini, Madison Avenue. I have to say that it's surprising that with one less school, we're not seeing an actual reduction in the Board of Education budget. When Island Avenue closed, there was a reduction of just over $1 million. So, I mean, I'd like to know how much we're saving by shutting down a school, and then what was added back so that all of that savings has now been eaten away. That's my question. And could that be put in that kind of a format so that can be clearer for us to see? And second question is, what is the enrollment expectation, increase or decrease, that you're basing this budget on? Thank you.
Thank you.
Maureen?
Reed Lopes from 25 Old Farms Road, and the one part of the town budget that gives me unease is looking backward to the amount of grants we've gotten over the last few years that have really helped with CIP in a number of areas. Watching what's happening just in our state legislature and at the federal level, I don't think we should expect anywhere near that kind of money to be flowing into Madison again. So I would ask that to be looked at further. I know it's sort of an unknown, but it's moving very fast now, particularly up in Hartford, because we're in the middle of that session. So I would hope by, was it April 8th is the next presentation, there'd be more discussion about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen.
Gary?
Hi, Terry Vanendolder, Bartlett Drive. I'm curious as to what dollar amount of the school budget goes into athletics versus scholastics. And I think it's great that we have the nicest football stadium in the state, but is that really what we're trying to do, is produce football players versus produce excellent students in their progression as adults? So I'm curious as to what percentage goes into the athletic programs as a whole. Secondly, there was a slide that referred to the percentage of the Board of Education budget at Madison is at 2.6% compared to much larger cities in the state, such as Fairfield, Greenwich, etc. And the comment was made that you could compare it to shoreline towns. I'm wondering why you did not compare it to shoreline towns and how Madison does sit relative to our closer neighbors in terms of population size and also in terms of closer with regards to the town budget and the education budget being the burden of the majority of residents versus not having a large commercial revenue. And then I wanted to put this general comment out there. When we're talking about percentages versus actual dollar amounts, a percentage of millions of dollars is millions of dollars. So even if it's only 3 point whatever percent of $100 million, it's still millions of dollars. So when you're looking at slides and you're focusing and on the percentages versus the actual dollar amounts, it's easy to say we're doing better than other places, but, or better than we were last year. But as the budget continues to increase year after year after year, no matter what that percentage is, it's still millions of dollars. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Well, virtually anybody?
I'll go.
Yes, Mr. Wilson.
I'll go.
You got both hands up. What does that matter?
Bruce Wilson, John's neighbor.
There you go.
So you know where he lives, you know where I live. So to the Board of Finance, as you consider buying down the mill rate with an allocation from the excess fund balance, I'd like to remind you that it's very much a finite fund. And the danger in continuing to fund operational spending from a fund that is not infinite is that the day we run out is a very, very bad day for taxpayers. So as you consider it, and we have a long practice of doing it, I would hope that you would consider an off-ramp, a way to wean the town off of those allocations in a controlled and measured way, much like the Madison investment plan is a controlled and measured way to manage the onset of debt and to blunt the peaks and valleys to taxpayers. And then to publicly, transmit that plan for consideration in future budgets, so that as we consider our budget, as the Board of Ed considers their budget, they know about what the offsetting factors you're going to do are. But I think the goal should be getting back to zero over some period of time. So I just want to make that reminder to you and request.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson, my neighbor. Thank you. Anybody else like to speak? You're not doing both hands. You only have to one. Second time. Third, being none. Public's budget hearing is now adjourned. It's up to us now. Thank you, everyone.